So I'm talking with my friend John, my new friend John. I've been acquainted with him for just a few months now, and he started messaging me as he was going through some interesting experiences, some shifts in perception, and so forth. So after we chatted a little bit, I asked him if he would be interested in sharing this experience he's had, or the series of experiences. And he generously agreed to do a video, and we're just going to have a little conversation and see how it flows, and probably put it up online for others to check out. So without further ado, this is John.
Hey.
Hey. So the first time I remember meeting you, I think you messaged me a few months ago, and excuse me, you said you were reading something. You're reading something maybe by Adyashanti or a book or something. Anyway, you had a sort of experiential knowing of something, or a kind of a pure experience from what I remember. Is that to your recollection as well?
Yeah. It was probably a little while after coming across your video with T-Dog. But yeah, I was reading a lot of Adyashanti stuff for, I think, a couple of days, and really conceptual, not getting anywhere. And I was sitting at home, just right on the computer reading it. And then it was very instant. And it was very different than some of the other shifts I had, but it was just almost like a weight lifted. I think I mentioned felt hollow in the stomach, if that even makes sense. That's a few months ago now. So yeah. Details about it are really hard to remember, but I think it was one of those aha moments. My wife was sitting on the couch and was like, wow, this is so simple. Mm-hmm. And that was very quick glimpse, and it was gone just as quick as it came. But I think that was the real thing of it, conceptually knowing there was something more to life. I had that up until that point, and at that point was just a taste that, okay, I know now.
Yeah.
And that was just the beginning.
Yeah. That's how I remember you describing it. And it's so interesting going back through this now, because it happens so frequently with people, like as awakening is approaching and things like that, where they have these insights, and it's almost like I see unfiltered reality just like speaking through them as far as the insight is concerned, but they're also functioning out of self still, or out of like an ego structure. And you can hear, like, I almost hear two voices at once when people describe this. But what you described here is reasonably typical of like a pre-awakening taste, where this is not conceptual. Clearly, it's kind of more real than real, more real than what you had taken to be real before. And yet it doesn't necessarily last. It's not like something shifts, never goes back. You're kind of in awe for weeks or months, sort of thing, at least with that particular experience. It tends to last like a few hours to a couple of days, I've noticed. And then
it was a couple of hours.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you're just like, where the hell did that go? And you kind of are almost left with you can talk about that, but you kind of left with a feeling of like, oh my God, I hope I didn't lose that. Where did it go? Because finally tasted something real,
Yeah. It was, I think the ego came in pretty quickly too, even like an hour within it happening. And I tend to conceptualize, and if I'm interested in a topic, I try to learn as much about it as I can. So right after that experience, I think within an hour, I was thinking about all these things like, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And then I laid down to go to bed and woke up the next day, and yeah, it was just back to normal life.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to ask you, just for anyone watching this. I was going to ask you just a little bit of background about yourself, maybe. What region of the country are you from? What sort of work are you in? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so I live in Massachusetts. I live in Marshfield now. I was born in Plymouth, probably 30 minutes outside of Boston, which everyone knows. Work for a restoration company. I'm a project manager, so deal with fires, floods, mold, trauma cleanup, and things like that. Right now, just really digging in mostly to this, whatever this is, while just living my normal life. Yeah.
And then I was going to ask you, what was it that led you to reading, a book like something from Adyashanti, which is pretty heavy duty, pointing, pretty potent stuff. What was there a history before that of interest in meditation or spiritual books or non-duality or anything specific?
Yeah. So I think early high school years, I got interested in a musician, Trevor Hall. Don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was very spiritual. I think he spent a while with, I think it was Neem Karoli Baba in India for a while. That just kind of got me into it. And I think I started messing around with third eye meditation. It was very heady, I think. But like third eye meditation, I messed with astral projection. Very weird thing. And that lasted about maybe a few years, and never really got back into it. And then, within the last few months, I ended up coming across your video with Z-Dog. And I think that was the first time where intuitively, I could say intuitively, but also conceptually, where it kind of felt, to me, you resonated with me a lot, because it wasn't just woo. There was the intuitive and instinctual part of it, but also it matches so well with the conceptual part of it. Mm-hmm. Like, I think you've had certain quotes recently about there being one electron in the entire universe and things like that. So that really resonated with me. I think even after high school, there were certain times in my life where I was always searching for something. I'm married, been with my wife for 12 years. But even with that, and that's nothing negative to say against her, it just always felt like there was something missing in life. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't put my finger on it. And I worked with a couple of guys who were into Christianity and things like that. And I got into that for a little while. And I didn't even realize it at this time. What I was looking for is this. Because I remember asking them, I'm like, have you guys ever had any experiences? And I was pointing to this. I don't remember how I explained it. And they were like, oh, yeah. And I went to church for a little while, but I just don't fit in with that scene. Those guys specifically, I don't have a negative thing to say about them, mm-hmm. but a lot of what goes on in the churches and things like that, and a lot of spiritual ego and judging, and it just never fit in. And I think now, coming across you talking about these things and reading some of Buddha's teachings, then going back and listening to some of the stuff in the Bible, it starts to make a lot more sense. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit simpler than people make it out to be. And then, so I came across your interview with Z-Dog, and that was it. I think I watched all of them. I think I watched all of the interviews that day.
Wow.
At that point. And then I don't even know how long after that, just probably within a week, I just started consuming. And I came across Adyashanti because I think you mentioned it in one of the videos. And at that point, his pointings were very direct, which I think were helpful.
Yeah.
So I think I've been looking for this my whole life.
I love it. I love it, man. Then I wanted to touch into our conversation. I actually did something I've never done before. I went back and looked through some of our messages because I talked to so many people now. I didn't want to mix anything up, but I remembered certain points. I just kind of went back and read some of the conversations we had, or at least parts of them. And there was one point where I think you're driving. Yeah, you had an experience while you were driving and mentioned something about that to me. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to. Which one was it? All right, I think I remember. How to explain it? See, this is the tough part with this stuff because it starts to sound confusing really quickly. so I think this was right around, this was a part of the awakening. I think if the awakening was to span a timeline of like a few hours to 8 hours, this kind of happened along that.
Yeah.
But I was driving and I don't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. I think I just was being present, really. That's the easiest, simplest way I can say it right now. And all of a sudden, it always felt like there was a center behind the eyes, kind of experiencing everything. And it was like a feeling that was actually there. And then all of a sudden that was gone. It was like that was there, and then it was here, and it was just eyes and seeing. And it was very abrupt. It was very abrupt. But it was normal. I think what I mentioned to you was I knew that it was there and I knew it was gone, but I didn't know how it was there in the first place. That didn't make sense to me because I couldn't figure out how that first viewpoint even got there. And then it was
Isn't
just
that crazy?
Gone. Yeah.
It's so wild. And that's, I love the way you described this. It is hard to talk about this, of course. And even the way we're speaking about it isn't exactly right because it's just too intimate or whatever. But I was reflecting when you said that on this strange phenomenon with awakening, that something goes away, but you can't for the life of you even say what it was. But also the strange thing about that, like that center, the feeling of being behind the eyes and so forth, it's so it feels so ingrained in who we take ourselves to be that you can't really notice the magnitude of it until it's gone. So it's quite paradoxical. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very paradoxical. I think I was explaining a couple of these things to my wife, and sometimes she's like, it sounds like you're just speaking in riddles. And I'm like, yes, I know. I know. I think this always makes me laugh because I think when you were doing one of your interviews with Z-Dog, he was like, well, I'll let you explain. I'm kind of clumsy. And you're like, well, it's clumsy when I explain it too. And that's just the way this goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm trying to think back too, because I think I messaged you twice about an experience when driving. Now, the experiences both of these experiences happened while I was driving. I don't remember if I told you I was driving to both of them, but the second one we can probably get into. And I think that's when you had mentioned that I had an awakening, because I didn't really know what happened. It was just something happened. And I think I reached out to you and you said it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that or.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So how did that unfold, or what did you notice, I guess, is maybe a simple way of saying it, asking.
Yeah. So trying to remember exactly the order of things or the order in which things happened is hard, but what worked well for me was inquiry, and it was the who am I inquiry.
Can you tell us about maybe just how your interpretation of it was as you did it? Because everyone sort of thinks about inquiry, or at least describes inquiry different. It's a slippery thing to talk about. So I'd be curious just how you felt like you were doing it.
Yeah. So I think I have an intuitive sense. When I think the first time I messaged you, I mentioned something. I was probably like between 8 to 10 years old, and I would find myself laying in bed certain times. Don't know why I would do this. And I would think about, who I am, my face, and think about, my friends, other people. And I think it would go along the lines of like, why am I me instead of any of them? But it was more of like a self-inquiry. And there were certain times where instantly it would become very destabilizing, like within seconds. And I would just stop asking that question. So I think there was something intuitive from a young age, why I don't know. But then the way I went about inquiry, I think I told you, for me, it was easier to write it down. My questions and answers, only I have ADHD. So a lot usually going on in the brain, and it's hard to one, have multiple trains of thought that are connecting, or keep the mind quiet. So it was easy for me to write it down. And I think a lot of this for me starts with a conceptual understanding. Once I understand it conceptually, then I realize, okay, I understand it conceptually, and that's not really the point, but that helps me then break it down. I think I was asking the questions of, I'm not my past. I'm not the thoughts that other people have about me. And then I think what I wrote down is, can I live without John or my idea of John? And the answer was yes, but how? And I think it just ended there. There was a conceptual knowing that self wasn't a thing, didn't exist.
Yeah.
But there wasn't really a shift at that point. And I think so. I was very, very vigorous with that for, I think, a week or two. And so the other moment when I was driving, now I think this was probably after an actual, what I would call the awakening, because I was just in flow. And I was going to the movies with my wife and her mom. And I think I messaged you that morning, I believe. And it was kind of between presence and lots of thoughts. Not that I was going back and forth necessarily, but I was kind of in between that. And it seemed like a daze. And you said that's very normal. So I just trusted it. And then all of a sudden we were getting ready to go to the movies, and I just didn't try and control anything. I just was just happy to be. The movie was something my wife liked. I like it, but when we got there, it was like a little kid watching it again. I was just so there. And I think the real big insight I had is we left and I offered to drive home. So my mom's wife didn't have to, or my wife's mom didn't have to. And as I was driving, I think there was a lot of traffic, and I just had the thought of, should I let someone over? And usually the way my insights work are, it's like a collection of thoughts I have that are just in the unconscious, and then something happens and the insight happens in a split second. And then to explain it is kind of like, to explain it is very wordy. But so that happened. And then I realized, all of the things I do, someone needs to take a left turn. I think, oh, well, John's a nice guy. He needs to let them go. Or the way I order coffees, just the way I would speak based on preconceived notions about myself and how I should present myself, how I should solve problems. And it just came down to that sense of me, and defending it was there in almost every single aspect of my life, to how I did things. And it could be the simplest thing. And that was a very big insight. And it was just, why? Why? And I don't even think I realized I did that until that moment. And it really caused me a lot of stress, because you think, okay, I'm supposed to be the nice, calm one. Well, when you don't feel like being nice, or someone's making you not calm, you then have to repress that to not act on it or speak your mind. And then I think intuitively you just know, like, that's not truthful. You're not being true to yourself in the moment. And I felt myself doing that a lot.
I wanted to reflect a couple of things. Is it okay if I interject?
Yeah.
I want to reflect a couple of things, because you just covered so much. It's so good and so many points, but I want to put a couple points together, and you can tell me if I'm getting this right in your experience. But one of the points you made, or one of the things you said, I loved, and it was, you said, can I do this without John, or without myself? Can I go beyond myself? And it sounded like such a simple question, But I just want to point out that your trust that you could do that, it might seem like such a small thing, and it is sort of a small thing in the moment. It almost feels like a belief letting go. But that's a really, really important point. And that's what, I mean, I've made videos about this saying that's the key to awakening, is like really trusting that you can go beyond everything you know about yourself. Even if that's not the shift right there, your insight was superb, and that you trusted it, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to see what happens now, perfect. And then I wanted to bring that back around to what you just said, which was, remind me what you were just talking about just before I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. And you might have to actually kind of rephrase what I say, because my mind can kind of be all over the place. But it was the insight while driving and talking about how the sense of who I thought I was and how that kind of played into the way I would carry myself and interact and do things.
Yes. And then, and you mentioned that you became aware of all of the seeming like decisions and what seemed to be guiding your sense of self and sense of doing in life was all sort of this collection of expectations you had about yourself that you never actually saw, in a sense, right? You never were able to like step back, whatever back is, and just go, oh my gosh, all of that stuff that's seemingly going on, right? Because it's quite mental, right? It's quite up in the mind. That little bit of space is what really matters, because in one sense, it's like, well, where are you looking from now? Right. Which is like such a funny and wonderful question that doesn't need an answer. But it's also, it shows that the sense of being a self, when we do self-inquiry and we go, is that me? Well, no, that's not me. Is that thought me? Well, that can't be me. It's a thought. As we do that, what we're really trying to do is get behind the frame of reference of everything that collects together that seems like a me I have to defend, but to just get behind it and realize like, holy cow, none of that's me. It can't be, right? Because it's so clearly observed in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of, just to be as authentic as possible, I think part of what helped with my inquiry and saying, hey, can I live without John, is also had a lot of self-loathing. And I think that was derived from those experiences of trying to defend who I thought I was, which led to a lot of suffering. So hindsight, and maybe it was like trying to bypass, but I don't think it was. I think it just made it a little bit easier to say I could live without who I thought I was.
Yeah.
Just to be honest with people.
Of course. No, well, I would argue that everybody has, at some level, everyone has that sort of shame body. And it's kind of tied to the perception of duality and the perception of the one that has to defend itself and struggle against everything and life and all that. I think the fact that you are so clear and you can so clearly just feel it right now, or know what the mechanism is. Again, I'm just pointing it out for anyone who's listening. That is really a marker of realization, of awakening, because you can see all aspects of the seeming personal self as sort of a collection of learned habituated beliefs and reactions and so forth, and including shame, right? Including there's a sort of shame barrier deep inside people, deep down there. And it's like, I think without a significant shift in identity, it's very hard to even know that that's there, actually, for a lot of people. So no, I want to acknowledge the fact that you are so clear on that, and that you can acknowledge it, that there is something at the bottom of us that's so like, there's nothing wrong with it intrinsically, like with the shame body or that deep emotional part of us. I don't think there's anything wrong with it intrinsically at all when it's fully embodied. But when we avoid and resist it because of like the outer shell of it that just says, don't look here, whatever you do, don't look here. What's so funny is, this is why awakening is such a personal and impersonal thing simultaneously. It's so paradoxical that way, but you really have to go into yourself too. You really have to be fully honest, fully authentic at some point to have this shift over, I think.
Yeah, I think authenticity is a big thing. I, for some reason, was blessed with being able to be, I would say, more authentic than most people. Um, and that's not a knock on anyone. Um, it just somewhat came intuitively to me. Like, I can tell you my baggage. I don't care. And throughout my life, I think that's also been a blessing. Because I've noticed just everyone I meet, it can be very open with me. And I think it's just because if I'm not judging myself, at least in that moment, and being able to talk about my ups and my downs, I think they feel comfortable being able to open up about themselves. So I tried to take that authenticity into this whole process, but there was a level of inauthenticity somewhere hidden deep down. It's a very subtle thing. I can't think of any specific moments kind of discovering that right now, but it's definitely there and still there.
I pick up on that from you, that authenticity you're talking about, and it doesn't come across as bragging in any way. And really, I think if anyone knew like some of the challenges you've been through, they'd probably see why you're relatable, and because you're in touch with your own suffering, because life, for many of us, probably all of us at some point sooner or later, will open our hearts to first our own suffering and then the suffering of the world. We can't conveniently overlook that at some point. But that to me is what is authenticity, deep authenticity. It's admitting that we suffer, right? In the beginning, for sure, it's admitting that we all carry this stuff around with us, regret, shame, self-doubt, it's all churning around in there somewhere. And just sort of admitting it, even at least to ourselves, is probably the first big step into true authenticity, I think. Vulnerability. So
now, real quick, on as far as admitting it, because I think for me, I think just saying, yeah, I suffer, isn't it? I think there's something deeper. Like if you were to look at it like an emotion, you can just acknowledge, oh, hey, I'm angry, and it's still kind of repressed. But I think like you have to realize you're suffering and like feel it. At least to me. I don't know how you feel about that.
Totally, 100%. I 100% agree with you. Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, I'm suffering. And
of course, yeah. It's like you can't say, I believe there's no self and you're enlightened.
Yeah, exactly.
This isn't about belief. This is about direct contact.
Yeah. So as far as some of my struggles, they can start just due to some issues growing up and things like that. I dropped out of high school at 16. Never got my GED or anything like that. And just kind of dealt with, say up until a few years ago, just the normal ups and downs that most people go through. But it was 2019, was diagnosed with testicular cancer, stage 3. It was quite the experience. It had spread to my lymph nodes in my back. I had 8.5 by 8.5 centimeter tumor, which caused quite a bit of pain. That was when I think morality really came into play, like understanding, like, okay, even though I'm 30, and it was 28 at the time, that okay, this is real. This is something serious going on here. And it was scary. And had surgery, went through 3 rounds of chemo, which went over about 9 weeks. Was in remission and had a checkup. And this is kind of funny how this went. Had a checkup right after, and I think I had a PET scan, and the oncologist said, oh, there's some lymph nodes in your chest now that are lit up. may or may not be cancer, or it could just be a reaction to the chemo. So she wanted to do a mediastinoscopy. So we did that. Luckily, it was just some inflammation in the lymph nodes. I think they called it sarcoidosis. So, okay, great. Did this happen like a month? I think this was within a month after finishing chemo. So kind of up until that point, I didn't even know, am I in remission or not? All of that had to play out first, having that surgery to find it out. And then it was like, okay, you're in remission. 3 or 4 months went by. Woke up in the middle of the night with the same pain I had before. It's a very distinct pain that I would get in the lymph nodes. I messaged my oncologist that morning. She brought me in for some blood work. Tumor markers were high. I think a couple weeks later, I think it was right around Christmas time, had another scan, and 8.5 by 8.5 centimeter tumor was back, and ended up going to Dana-Farber in Boston. And to keep it short, I was out of work for 9 months last year. I did an initial round of regular chemo and then ended up going through 3 rounds of high dose chemo with 3 tandem stem cell transplants. So it was quite the time. It was also right around when COVID hit. So the initial chemo rounds I had in the hospital, which spanned over 3 or 5 days, my wife could visit me. Right when I started the inpatient for the high dose, which for me, it was 2 weeks each time, wife couldn't visit me. So in the hospital, going through that all alone, and I don't do well alone. It was a very tough time.
I imagine.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of implications when you're doing high dose chemo with stem cell, because they're giving you enough chemo where you're going to need your peripheral stem cells to pretty much bring you back to life. But your white blood cells, your neutrophils, red blood cells, everything just drops. And throughout that, couldn't have anyone visit me or anything like that. And I think even if I could, I still would have been miserable, because this was 3 rounds and each time were 2 weeks just in the hospital. It was very uncomfortable too, because there was a lot of unknowns. And you could say it's probably I've never really had depression, but I would call that probably the most depressed I've ever been, was throughout that.
I can imagine.
But 9 months later, I was in remission and got back to normal life. And now it's funny because I think I'm about 1.5 years removed. And it's so hard to even look back at that because, when you're going through high dose chemo, I mean, just to get up to go to the bathroom is hard. I didn't even want to drink water. I would ask for fluid instead of water because I just didn't want anything while going through it. And now being here, talking to you, going to work, I'm pretty hyper and excitable. So it's very hard to look back at it and think, okay, I felt like that. And now I feel like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was in I think probably a very dark place throughout that.
Sure.
And I don't know what carried me through, to be honest. Probably just the will to live. And I think part of it, some of the things I went through growing up, I always had a sense of you'll be okay. Just keep going. I think I've been trying to think back on how that has played into this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Has this changed your view of the unknown, or your even the life and death thing? Like, did something change about that?
So reflecting on it, I think going through that has made this process a little bit easier in the sense that, I don't think my life was never really in jeopardy going through that cancer treatment, but when you have no neutrophils, no white blood cells, you get an infection. I mean, anything can happen, sepsis. Yeah. So I think hearing about you talk about it, like some of these shifts and things like that can feel like you're dying. And so I think having gone through that, it was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm going to go through this no matter what. So I think it was just more or less, because part of this process, what we're talking about, isn't all smiles. There's some scary times, some destabilizing times, but I think I just always told myself it's not going to be worse than that. And it was as simple as that. I don't know if I don't think going through that played into a search for this, because I think I was pretty happy just in the sense when I got out of the hospital the last time, was in remission and got back to normal life. And then I just happened to come across you like probably a year after it happened. Could that have helped? That I don't know about. Like one day in retrospect, will I think back and say, everything lined up for that to happen? Maybe. But I didn't get out of the hospital and was like, okay, I need to search for whatever this is.
Right.
I was just back to normal life.
Yeah. So when you
but
were,
I think,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask, when you were kind of working through or approaching the shift that we were talking about, or this transformation or whatever it is, falling away perhaps, I think I remember you talking about going through the fear barrier, like a pretty intense physiologic fear that came at some point, if I remember right. Maybe I could be wrong about that.
I don't think that was me.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. I think initially when I messaged you after reading Adi Ashanti, I think I just asked, like, how can John not be in control and life still work? Like, how can I go to work and function? And I think you had mentioned, you just have to go past it. And beyond that is fear.
Yeah.
But for me, I honestly never really, throughout these shifts, I don't think I've had a notable physiological reaction. It's just, I'm blessed for that, because it sounds like some people have it pretty bad and pretty strong.
Yeah. I mean, my sense after hearing this story that you went through with your health is, man, it really sort of does pave the way for this, because one thing that does die away when we're young and we come down with any kind of potentially life-threatening illness or devastating illness, one thing that does die away is our convenient belief that we're immortal, sort of. Like, it just comes with youth, right? We just think, oh, I'm not going to get sick. I'm not. And then when it happens, it feels so threatening to, like, this part of yourself that you just took for granted, that, oh, I'm healthy. I'm always going to be okay, kind of thing. And that's, I can see why that could lead to a depression and a grieving process. And that, I think you sort of paid the dues ahead of time, maybe, on this one.
Yeah. I think you kind of touched on it there too, is, it's my train of thought. ADHD. I love it. I completely forgot what I was going to say. We'll just keep moving.
So I wanted to ask you a little more about what the time frame, or the kind of shift that did occur around those discussions we had about noticing. I would almost call it like an equality among things around you, where all of a sudden you weren't the center of everything anymore. It was kind of like everything around you had equal significance, or something like that. Am I paraphrasing that wrong, or?
No, I don't think so. I think if we're talking about the same, I think I had messaged you one day about, I think it was, how did I say it? I think it was along the lines of things that I would deem enjoyable versus things that I would deem mundane started to lose contrast. If that's what you're talking about. But they definitely started to lose contrast, where it was kind of equality per se.
Yeah.
There just wasn't a lot of judging and adding labels and value to experiences, into objects and things like that. It was just experience.
Yeah.
I think I've messaged you quite a bit with multiple different shifts.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I would call them shifts.
Right.
I think just realizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. In
not too long ago, you messaged me, and I thought it was such a good conversation because you said you were asking me about something, and I can't remember what it was. And I think I just asked you, can you see how that doubt is a thought? And you said, oh, absolutely. But then the next question was the one when you said what you said, I was like, yes, because it's so nice when someone's had some kind of shift in identity that it's so easy to point them back to presence. Because I think what I said as well, that thought could be true, could not be true, whatever. And I think I just said, is there something here that just does not apply to at all? That there is no doubt in this, that it doesn't, it's not contingent upon a belief or not a belief. And you were like, definitely. You were very clear that is obviously here. It's like something we can only define in the negative. We can only define it in what it's not.
Paradox.
Paradox is like another way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that realization, funny, I think I have a knack for these happening while driving. I drive a lot for work. But that one was, I think I touched into it a little bit during pre-awakening. Maybe it's a conceptual thing. I don't know. But I think the way I was initially viewing being present or awareness was, it almost felt to me like something stepped back and was then aware of everything. Mm-hmm. It's the easiest way for me to explain it without touching things. And I think the first time it came to me was I was driving, and it was right after that first shift happened with the eyes and where I was looking from. So I was watching cars pass by while being in awareness. So I'm driving, and then cars are passing by. I'm thinking, okay, they're in my field of awareness. Then they pass by. And I think we've talked about kind of the empty space where everything happens, or there's movement and stillness at the same time. I think at that point, I kind of realized, I think the first insight was about possessions of, like, oh, this is my water, this is my phone. But when you're kind of in that still space, you're like, nothing can touch that. It's weird to say that we have possessions or own things, because where are they? At that moment, they're just thoughts. So when I was driving recently, I got into that place of stillness while I was driving, doing things, steering, probably talking on my headphones for work. And within that stillness, all movement happens. It's very hard to explain, especially again, when it was probably like a week ago. But I just noticed that everything, I'm trying to remember how I said it exactly. I think I said there's stillness where movement happens. I can't remember it exactly, but yeah, it was movement and stillness at the same time.
How is it now? Do you have access to that now? Is that like not here now, or?
No, it's still here.
Right.
To be honest, I don't have access to it throughout the day. Definitely still deal with kind of breaking down some of the barriers and things like that just through everyday life. But in moments like this, I can just kind of step back. Mm-hmm. And so from my cancer treatment, because you've talked a lot about tinnitus. So the high dose chemo I had was platinum based, so that damages the inner ear. So I have tinnitus, but I can tell when I'm present, because when I can step back instantly, the tinnitus is very loud and I can hear it. When I'm going throughout my day, I don't really hear it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can step back, and it's very hard to explain. It's almost like when I'm in that stillness, now everything's still moving, is I can almost even, if you were to conceptualize that you're kind of behind your eyes in this space, I can be in that stillness and move my head and still feel still, even though the head's moving. That's the only way I can explain it. And that stillness penetrates everything. It's everything happens inside that stillness.
Yeah.
And I think I messaged you about it. And I think for me, it's a lot of doubt comes right after. Is I think what's hard about this is if you're going through it alone and don't have someone to reference, and especially with me always second guessing myself, like, oh, was that a conceptual thing that I then just had an experience of, or is this kind of an insight that I should acknowledge? So I messaged you about it, and I think you said because I asked, is this an illusion? You said the only illusion is differentiating between the two or explaining it. And that really was like, okay, yeah, good point. Because there's no way to explain it. And I think the more you go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to point out too, if anyone's like following this conversation, that it's very typical after awakening to have those periods of like almost like a contraction. It may not feel like a contraction, but like getting caught into thoughts or even doubt. And then suddenly either, as you said, you can lean into it or lean back, or it just comes upon you and it's like, there's just presence again. There it is. It's here. It couldn't be other than this, obviously. And everything else is a thought, right? Anything that says anything about this, about anything, about me, about an environment, the world, it's thoughts, right? But this, what we're talking about, this absolute paradox, which maybe you could say the only thing about it is that it's a paradox, but that paradox explains everything, including objects, seeming objects, the senses. That's undeniable. And that's the sense I get from you when we talk. It's clear that I don't want to say you know it. I don't want to say you've realized it, because it's nothing that's been added to you. It's always here. It's just that something got out of the way enough that you have access to this most of the time or whatever. And that's very typical of like that post-awakening sort of experience. It's like, you kind of shift into me and then out of me and into deep, profound presence that's completely uncaused. And then, some emotions come but it sort of has to be that way too. And as you mentioned, that stillness never really goes away. And it's so wonderful. I mean, it's like, I try not to make it a big cookie to chase around, because the seeking mind can chase it, but it is wonderful. But it's wonderful because it's just not subject to anything. It's not subject to whether I like it or don't like it, whether it's happy, sad. It's just what it is, clearly all the time, in a sense. But it's not really in time either. So, but that, as simple as it is, that is just your underlying nature, let's say, or the underlying nature of what's what. Just being able to simply acknowledge that, to me, is what it's sort of the litmus test for awakening. It's just something I can feel when I talk to somebody. And I also don't want even to make awakening something that people chase. And yet I feel compelled to say that it's definitely possible too. It's something that certainly you can clarify, let's say.
Yeah, I think why I tried to preface before I had mentioned that last insight, that the insight happens like that. And then because of prior experiences, I can explain it. And obviously it's clumsy right now. I have the privilege when messaging you to think about how to word it correctly. So it's a little bit easier. But I think it's good for people to know that when explaining some of these insights and realizations, I didn't think my way to that. Mm-hmm. It just happened. Yeah. And it was literally a split second and a knowing. And then it sounds like I thought my way to it, because when you go to explain it, there's not a single word that can explain it. Mm-hmm. One, no word can explain it. And two, I couldn't explain that split second with a split second description. Mm-hmm. Just not going to work. So I think I kind of say that because to me at first it was like, oh, when people were talking about their insights or some of your videos, like, oh, he thought his way up to that. And that was kind of a projection, but sometimes I would be like, oh, I got to think my way around this. And that just never worked. And it would really just be stepping back for a moment. In some moments, it's just stepping back and it's quiet, and others step back and there's a realization very quickly. But it happens in an instant. And I think it's just good for people to know that I didn't get there by thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I say that with sincerity because I think a lot. I think a lot. I conceptualize and intellectualize everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing about thinking, and I'm sure anyone who's watched my stuff or read my book knows I say this probably more than I say anything, is it's non-conceptual. Ask the question, who am I? But don't settle for a concept. Like I say it over and over and over. And sometimes you just got to hear it 30 times or something, or the conditions have to line up and all of a sudden it clicks what that means. And you're like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Exactly. Non-conceptual. It's not, you don't think your way into this, but the seeking mind will always hear the message that way until the seeking mind is not so solid with identity, until the identity kind of falls out of that seeking process of thinking and finds itself more, well, as this stillness we're talking about. If there's even identity there, it's hard to say. I mean, identity even deconstructs itself, but the stillness is clear. You also mentioned like sitting back. I'm just going to ask a question that's subtle, but it may be answerable or not. I don't know. Is the stillness that we're talking about, or maybe the awareness, or that which makes everything clear as an experience, does it feel like a three-dimensional space and everything's sort of floating around in it, or is it a different kind of experience?
It's a different kind of experience. It's just empty, but it's not.
Yeah.
I think how I experience it now, after having, I think we had a conversation a couple of days ago about another insight. And I tend to do a lot of work before going to bed. Whether you call it work, I don't know. I don't meditate or anything like that, but focusing on sounds and things like that, things that you point to. And it's very easy to step back when I'm laying down in bed. And I think when I was in that place, it quickly became like a singularity, in the sense that we run the AC every night, which is very good because I can focus on that sound. But the last 2 nights while doing it, I experienced all sensation from the same point, or all happening at once. Like the TV, the AC, the feelings in my hands, or whatever sensations, was like they were all hitting one point from that place. So it's almost like a singularity, I guess. But yeah, it's not like three-dimensional. It's very, very difficult to explain.
Oh yeah, welcome to my world. So the sensations, say like even sensations in your body now, whatever, since your hands or your face or head, physical sensations and sound. Like if you look at it, do you find like a boundary between those experiences? Like if you're like move attention from sound to sensation, is there something intrinsic to the experience that says one's this and one's that?
No.
Right.
Yeah. No, and I think what tuned me into this was watching one of your videos on the nature of sound. And I think what kind of clicked for me was you'd mentioned where is the sound hitting? Like there's the sound, and then where is the point where you're hearing it? And it's a very non-conceptual hearing, not thinking like, oh, I'm hearing in my ear. And I think that helped me clarify, because there is a point where that sound does hit, and it's the same point that everything else hits, at least for me. Yeah. That's how I can explain it now, but there's really no difference between the sound and the sensation. Sight is very hard for me to clarify, because that's a whole nother conversation, because I can't clarify that yet. Yeah. Because I don't know where I don't know where that hits. But and to be honest, at night, when kind of feeling all those things in that single spot or all at once, it's quite overwhelming, to be honest. I think I shy away from it very quickly.
Yeah,
I just don't think
I want to reflect on two things you said. One is you said that there's the point that the sound hits is not like an ear or somewhere. It's not me, but it hits somewhere. And what I'm experiencing as you say it is it does hit somewhere, and it hits where the sound is. The sound is hearing itself. Isn't that crazy? Like I mean, it's so bizarre. It's like there's no mental model for that, and yet it's so like intimate and so just incredible. The sound is hearing itself. It's so fucking intimate, you know.
And I think that's exactly what it is. When I first felt that, it was very quick. It was very quick, and I think instantly after, I just went intimate, because I've heard you say it, but it's also the only way to explain it was intimate. It's close. It's too close. I think
the other thing I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to reflect on that you mentioned the sound. When everything is sort of condensed into one, well, let's say one taste, one experience, one point, but it's literally all senses expressing as sort of this, and it can be overwhelming, intense. You can even back out of it. That's also reasonably common. That's definitely a deeper stage of realization than typically happens right with the first awakening. But as I mentioned, there's often a fear barrier approaching first awakening, or as people are starting to go deep in self-inquiry. There's also, interestingly, a fear barrier later on when people start to experience non-dual. And it's exactly what you said. It's like, whoa. I mean, when all of a sudden everything that seemed like it was out there that I could come back in here and take a respite from and think and distract myself, like it's not distractible. It's right here. It's full on life. Yeah. It can take a little while, I guess, to sort of adjust to that maybe. But some people experience it as fear. Like if I just literally just melt into everything, where am I? Like I'm gone. And you can kind of, your body feels that. But again, like any sort of fear barrier or whatever, or reluctance or anything, it over time, it just feels totally natural. And it's like, you actually get used to being the environment because there's no one in the environment. It's just the self-reacting environment, you know, of non-dual sound and sensation and visual dance and so forth. So anyway, now I'm talking too much.
Nope, that's fine. Yeah, as scary as it is, it's only been the last few nights, but I keep going back.
Yeah.
Why not?
I love it.
Why not?
I love your adventure spirit.
Honestly, too, it's because I think a lot. Right when I lay down most nights, a lot of ruminating, and it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. I consume a lot of podcasts and things like that, usually more for a learning aspect, but then my mind just goes. So this also helps me kind of calm the mind and fall asleep. But when that happens, all those sensations at once, instantly, it's like, how the hell can I sleep with all that? It's too much. At least then it's too much. And I quickly back away, but I keep going back. That I think is hard to find. Presence is easy to find all the time. That is hard for me to find all the time. That experience. Things have to be calm right now for it to be that way. But it's definitely the experience.
Yeah, I love it.
And I think a lot of the insights and things like that happen now, I really don't even speak about them unless I'm bringing them up to you to clarify, because it's just paradox and people look at you like you're crazy or what are you're contradicting yourself. So I don't even bother. But I think the more this goes on, the less the need is to explain it.
Absolutely.
At least I think I can notice a small bit of ego behind when I ask you about it. But there also is a doubt in just a wanting to know, like, is that the right path, even though there is no path? But there's no need to explain it to people and like, hey, I had this experience. Isn't this cool? I'm better than you. No, that doesn't happen.
Good. I don't get that sense from you at all, but that can be a challenge for people sometimes, is like unseen competitiveness, or, you know, or just even trying to collect their own experiences like a rock garden or something. Because as you know more and more, it's like their memories, you know, past experiences are just that, they're just memories and so forth, you know. And the reason I do these videos, although they can have that side effect to make people seek or feel, you know, FOMO or something, but the real reason I do it is because just these little glimpses we get just by touching into this stuff, and, you know, and again, you're relatable, that this can happen for anyone. If someone's watched this video for the last hour that we've been recording, if you've gone this far, you can do this. Like, it's just available because it's there. And that's really all this is about. But I agree, like, for me, I really didn't talk about it for a number of years at all, even to people who are close to me, because why? What's the point? It's like once you could almost say the realization expands out into everything anyway. Everyone that you come in contact with is reality. You know, it's just all one vibing self sort of responsive thing, no thing or whatever. Whoa, why describe it? What's the point? You know, unless, for me, it just started coming up because people started asking or whatever. But I think it's good. I
think good, the one.
Good instinct.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say it's good instinct to not want to overly describe it, detail it, journal it too much. You know, some of that's fine, but yeah.
And I think for me, when I would do that a lot, it kind of makes the memory about it stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The more I kind of label it and things like that, it then becomes a place to get back to.
Yep.
Even though it happened and it's gone.
Right.
And I think the other thing, and you mentioned it a lot, which was beneficial for me, but there is no specific way that's right to go about this. And you said that a lot, like, you don't necessarily need to meditate. You don't. I think that's very important for a lot of people. And I think that's kind of why I resonated with you, because you kind of touch on a lot of different topics and inquiry and meditation, natural meditation. So it's not like a religion. Like, hey, you got to do it this way and go through all this to then get the cookie, like you say. Yeah. So I think that's good for people to know.
Yeah, everyone wakes up their own way. You know, everyone shows me how they wake up. That's the way I could say I perceive it, although it's just in this moment I'm saying it this way, but it's sort of like a dance. Like, I don't look at someone and try to impose a framework on them that, like, you have to do this, 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 and this. I notice patterns, but generally speaking, if someone wants to wake up, I'm like, all right, well, what's going on? You know, and they just start talking about their perceptions, their beliefs, their feelings, whatever's happening. And they start going, oh, you know, presence, what's this? You know, and I just keep asking about it, or saying, hey, have you looked here? Have you looked there? But yeah, everyone wakes up their own way. And I love that about this. And it's true. Like, you know, inquiry is great, but not everyone really does formal inquiry. Meditation's great, but a lot of people don't really meditate much. They tend to do more after they wake up, and it clarifies and you just really enjoy presence. But even then, is it meditation if it's happening all the time, or is it just sitting down and not distracting yourself?
Yeah, I think for me now, it's more of like what you would call a natural meditation, where I just don't control anything. If thoughts happen or focuses, that's kind of what works intuitively for me.
Yeah.
I think the other great thing about this, and at least the way you talk about it, the interviews you've done with people, is I hate the bullshit of some of the way people teach, and no one specific, but you have to talk like this, and you have to be very calm, and you have to be a certain way. Like, you have to be spiritual. Like, someone could look at you and say that's spiritual. What's nice about this is you don't have to be anyway. And that's very, very, very refreshing. Whereas you can walk by someone and have no idea that they're awake or liberated. Now, maybe you talk to them and you can get that they're open, but it's not something you carry around with you by the way you talk or wear clothes. And I think there's a lot of that happens in the world. So it was refreshing to come across you without that being the case.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that. And it's such a good point. But you said it before your package arrived. I'm actually sending you a package with some white robes and beads for Christmas. That's a joke. But anyway,
yeah, exactly. I probably wear
it. A spiritual persona it's fine if that's how you like to dress and act and whatever, but it just doesn't equate to realization in the way we talk about it. What equates to realization is really authenticity. It's really being honest about who you are, what you feel, what's happening in the moment, your fears, your curiosities. That's the beauty of it. It's really about you. And I tried to make that come across in the book, that it's not about me. It's not about Buddhism. It's not about Advaita. It's not about a technique specifically or anything like that. It's not about a paradigm. It's about your own potential to experience living truth in the way that only you can do it, through that body mind, in a sense. Like, that's your antenna, I guess, to reality. But it's amazing that it's possible, and it always expresses with such unique flavor. Yours does, for sure. And I really enjoy talking to you because you're very authentic. But also I like that you can speak from the insight. You can tell, like, and people think it's so strange sometimes when I say, oh, I know it's possible for you. I know this, like, everybody has this potential, but there's something about it that you just know that it's not special. It doesn't make you stand apart and be special. It's not like that. It's the opposite. If anything, it's where I meet everyone. It's where I meet everything. It's where I meet the sky. It's where I meet a footstep. It's where I meet sadness. It's where I meet my girlfriend. It's where I meet you, my patients, anything, everything. It's so beautiful. That point you were talking about, where the contact point, it's everywhere, and it's not a point. It's not a center.
And I think you explained it's not mystical. Mm-hmm. I was thinking it was before I had some of these insights. Mm-hmm. However you experience mystical or conceptually think about it, like vibrant colors, things can get clearer, but it's just like a slight fog that's just gone, but it's not like things start to dance or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
You don't suddenly find yourself in the orbit around Neptune.
No. And for me, that was good to come across, that I didn't have to look for those type of mystical experiences, because it's everyday life. Mm-hmm. It just is. I think I had messaged you the other day after having an insight about emotions. Do you remember that?
Not specifically.
It was in regards to like annoyance and things like that, and just letting them express themselves. Mm. So I think the insight was, I was at a customer's house and I was getting annoyed. Admittedly, I'm not going to lie about it. And I think before I would either say, hey, John's a nice guy, like, don't get annoyed, and just kind of repress that. Or the opposite. I don't know what the opposite was. I would usually just repress it. But instead of getting in its way, just kind of letting it express itself. And I don't mean in like, I was being derogatory or aggressive or anything like that, but just letting that emotion express itself. It has such an intelligence. The only way I can say it is it expresses in the way that's extremely natural and okay for that situation. And it just kind of goes out and it's gone. That feeling's gone. So I think that was a very good insight, because then I realized that, it's either the repression or I think it was the insight was the repression, or like the, how can I say it? The gross reaction you could have with that emotion. Either of those lead to a lot of problems, at least for me. So just letting it come through, go out, it's there, it's gone, and it was honestly amazing because it wasn't like, it didn't feel like I was doing it. I wasn't in control of it. I just kind of let it speak and do its thing. And it was gone within seconds.
That's beautiful. Yeah, one of the really cool sort of aspects of, I don't know, presence or awake nature, or whatever, is that it doesn't try to apply a paradigm to things. It doesn't apply a spiritual paradigm like, oh, I'm spiritual. Now whatever. It's actually sort of the opposite. It's, instead of having a paradigm, it's infinitely flexible. It's if you could call it flow, but I would just say it's just adaptability. It's well, just this, but there's a one phrase or one sentence in the Heart Sutra that says freed of delusive hindrance. And that's freedom, man. It's so beautiful, because hindrance, fixating in anything, in me, in not me, in spiritual and non-spiritual, in anything, is what causes us to suffer. And it also makes distance between ourself and the world, or apparently, and other people especially. But to recognize that flow and ability to let go, and notice that letting go is the nature of this. It's endlessly letting go, but it's also endlessly full, which is so wonderful, so paradoxical. But
yeah, it's all I think when you say two sides of the same coin is the best way to kind of explain it. I think another thing I want to mention, just for everyone, is we're having this conversation about these insights, and that does not mean that I don't still struggle somewhat to say throughout the day and things like that. I don't want people to get that sense, because we are talking about some of the insights that, I'm liberated or whatever, that there isn't still fixations and patterns and things like that go on. So yeah. I just feel like being open about that.
Of course, yeah.
So I think it's necessary to realize that there is work to be done, and it's not like, oh, I met you 4 months ago and then here I am. All's right in the world and there is an emotion. And I think that's one of the other insights I had, is I always thought that awakening or liberation was just bliss all the time.
Right.
But I think I realized that's not true. It can't be true. Even how I'm saying to everyone that I still struggle, that's enlightenment. That's liberation, all of it. So I think it's good for people to know that. Yeah, I still have some things to go through and dissolve and things like that.
Yeah. And the work sort of comes to you, doesn't it? I mean, what needs to be experienced shows up in the moment, and now we can't go, okay, I'll put that off till it's convenient. Like that world is sort of dying away, where we can try to arrange life the way is most comfortable for us. It's not so much like that.
Yeah, I experienced the spiritual no person's land quite strong. I have no reference for what is this period, like the honeymoon period. I don't know if I had that or not. The way you explained it, I would say mine only lasted about a week or two. And then, like you say, everything's in your face. All of your repressed emotions and avoidance patterns, and you're right, they just come and you have to deal with them. And I think what gets tough is for me, as I started to deal with them and kind of get beneath a lot of them, they're spread apart. Now they're not happening all the time, but there's still something there. But then at that point, it's not so obvious where I can just find it in the moment. I have to let the moment in life just kind of show me now. I just have to be open and wait for that moment to come where there's an insight or some type of belief or pattern that comes up that I have to examine and get underneath. I think that's kind of where I am now, where a lot of the times there isn't anything obvious in the moment to get under, but I can tell there's something there that will come at some point. And I think I messaged you about that a couple of times, saying there was something I need to let go of, but I don't know what it is. And like you just said, it'll come. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
So I just had to trust it. Some of this is just patience. I don't think you can, maybe you can, maybe you can become liberated in a split second, but I don't think you can brute force your way through it with self-inquiry or meditation. From my experience so far, I don't think that's possible. I think you have to have some patience as well.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with that. I think I've seen people have some pretty damn deep awakenings, but it's a little less common. But even then, there's still work to do. It's kind of at what level you do it. Sometimes it's all at the physical level, and that's not. It may sound like something someone would want, but when you really have no barriers, not even physical or emotional barriers anymore, it's quite painful actually. It's like a physical experience of pain or energy moving in intense ways, and you can feel the blockages, and it's very, very direct and intimate in the body. So it's a little different for everyone, but there's always material to work through. And even after liberation, there's still like as Suzuki Roshi said, this San Francisco Zen master guy, who's kind of famous. He said it's like plucking mind weeds. You always have to keep an eye out, because the weeds can start growing, and it's just a sort of alertness that after some point, it's sort of always there. It's not like you can rest and not have to worry about delusion anymore. It's more like you're so exquisitely attuned to even the roots of suffering now, so it does start to become a spontaneous movement that carries itself deeper and deeper, but it's not like you're off the hook either. As long as you're alive in a physical body, you're subject to causalities of the physical world and so forth. So
and I think that's an easy way to realize that you don't have control either. Absolutely. There's too many things, too many people, too many things out of your control. Everything's out of your control, but that you just can't. And I think I'm also at the point too where, like, not preparing for this conversation, but throughout the day I was like, oh, I'm anxious, and thoughts would come up. I'm not thinking them, I don't want them there, but I had to experience them. I had to deal, like, what am I going to say, what are we going to talk about? Not as bad as they used to be, because I can kind of look at it and say it's just a thought, and no matter how clairvoyant I am, I'm not going to be able to say word for word exactly how this conversation is going to go, and the bad things or the good things that'll happen.
Sure.
So I just kind of have to experience it. And whatever those anxious thoughts were, nothing like this conversation has gone so far. But yeah, those things still come up all the time. I don't know if you call them intrusive thoughts, but they just pop up and you got to deal with them.
Yeah.
But dealing with them and kind of getting to this point doesn't mean that it's easy.
Right.
I think dealing with them is harder than pushing them down in the immediate, because you have to feel it. And you have to acknowledge that it's there.
I couldn't agree more with that. I couldn't agree more. It's like, I think the thing that's interesting is when we're just mind identified, like we're lost in thought most of the time. Thought doesn't have a lot it can really offer, but it can offer like this sort of procrastination, like put it off, distract, because it's just this house of mirrors of thinking. But when you break through that, as far as identity is concerned, you kind of lose that choice to. You can distract yourself a little bit, but these things come knocking at your door, and if you don't open the door will open, and you're going to have to feel it. You're going to have to feel the emotions. You're going to have to recognize the thoughts, and then notice the resistance patterns to the thought and emotion, which ultimately is what makes it anything. Because once the resistance falls, thought and emotion become extremely light as well. So, but you have to feel that for that to happen. It has to come fully into consciousness, not some avoidant mental process where we run off into who knows where in our thoughts. So yeah, everything becomes pretty raw, pretty direct, kind of in your face, and not necessarily on your timeline.
Definitely not on your timeline. I think I can tell when I'm open and kind of just letting, I guess, the universe show me the way, if you want to call it that. But I think probably about a week or two after I messaged you about being in spiritual no person's land. What was really funny, I ended up having a customer at work. I think I had to go. She was in the city. It was probably like an hour away from the office. I was on call, so it was like 7:30, 8:30 at night. And we got into a conversation, and all of a sudden, we started talking about this, Eckhart Tolle, and very similar backgrounds. And she was kind of, if you want to say there's a path, she was at the same spot in that path that I was. We ended up having a conversation for a few hours, and it was exactly what I needed at that moment. And, she really was able to get beneath some things for me. And it was, one of them was, I think I was stuck in this. I think a lot of people get stuck here is, I've had this awakening but what's my purpose? I feel like I'm meant for something. And I think she looked at me and she said, what's behind that? Why do you have that? And I really couldn't think about it. I couldn't figure it out. And she was like, I'm just going to give you a little hint. Maybe does that make you feel special in a way to keep going? I'm like, that's exactly it. It was a way to keep going. It was like, oh, I have a purpose in life. I have some big thing I have to accomplish and save the world. And it wasn't special in like an ego way, but it was, I guess you call it like a pacifier. Since like that's the reason to keep going and not deal with some of my stuff. And she cut right through.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it just happened right at the right time. I was really stuck for probably a few weeks, a month, just not knowing what direction to go. It's funny that things happen like that.
Yeah, there's so much synchronicity in this. The mind is funny that way too. It's like, it's kind of like the ultimate opportunist in a sense, so anything can happen, awakening can happen. And it's like, oh, cool. This is what we're going to use that for. Like there's an assumption already in place that, oh, okay, well, if that happened, then maybe that means this and this and this about me, or what does this mean about me? Or, it's like you're running with the baton and here comes your mind and just grabs the baton and keeps running straight ahead of you, and you don't notice the switch over almost for a while. But yeah, it's true though. There's so much synchronicity in the world. And that's like, I tell people, I'm not a teacher, but I have teachers. Everything is my teacher. Every you're my teacher. Really, like, how do I learn about awakening? I watch people wake up and I just sort of, I don't know, I share the experience with them maybe, but I learn from the colors and the forms and the sky and emotions and all of it, like the teachers and pointers are everywhere when you really start opening to this. It's very cool.
Yeah, I think I had an insight. So a couple months ago we had the hurricane, and when you're just open, some of these insights come, and nature can be your teacher. But we had a lot of tree damage and, trees falling on people's houses and things like that. And my wife and I were walking the dog in the path we have, and there was probably a couple 50, 60-foot trees down, quite large. And I think I had the insight, whether it was corny or not, I don't know. It was cool at the time, but it was, how tall would a tree grow if it spent its whole life worried it's going to get blown down by the wind? It just would never grow to that great. So it was kind of like a thing of, you can spend your whole life just avoiding, and because something might happen negative. And it was more of an insight for myself. But it would never grow that big and beautiful if it just thought, oh, one day there's going to be a hurricane and I'm going to fall. So, I'll just stay a little plant. But yeah, anything could be your teacher, like you said. And I try to tune into that when I can. Sometimes it's difficult, especially working around people who may or may not make you feel uncomfortable, or like there's just certain situations that it can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Because obviously life is life. You're not going to enjoy everyone. Doesn't mean you have to be rude or mean, but yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, I think we've come towards the end of our time. Anything you want to leave with the video? Leave the video with any? words of encouragement or connection to anyone watching? You don't have to.
Anyone watching, I think I would just say keep going.
Yeah.
If you started, keep going. If you haven't started, maybe consider it. I think, like you said, the biggest thing is first, there has to be an element of understanding that you suffer, and feeling that.
Yeah.
And I think you make it very clear, but I'll make it very clear. There's definitely times where the fear is, oh my God, am I going to go crazy? Am I going to develop some form of psychosis throughout this? No, I haven't yet. So I haven't yet, but that fear's been there for me too.
Right.
It comes. I think it's just inevitable.
Yeah.
So we'll point that out as well. And I think the other thing is just authenticity is a big thing, I think. I try my best to be authentic, but I think that helps a lot. And I think it helps people around you as well. I think there's a lot of people who, like you said, the mask, don't talk about the things they struggle with, especially like people you just see on a day-to-day at work. Not that you need to go give your baggage, but we put on this face like, we're okay. Everything's good. Life's perfect. And I think that closes people off from even thinking they can talk about their problems with anyone because they're all doing it. So it's, that everyone's life must be perfect. So I'm the only one who screwed up inside my head, even though we all have those things that we're going through.
For sure.
I think people will be amazed if they can open up like that with someone, or I think it's a good thing. A small step. Yeah, that's it. That's all I have.
Small steps, man. I love it. Yep. Well, John, I appreciate your time. I appreciate sharing everything you did so directly and honestly, and I think it'll be helpful to people. So thanks again.
You're welcome.